The desert did not care that she had been left behind. It stretched wide and quiet, painted in dust and sun, holding its breath as if it had seen such stories before. The girl stood at the edge of the wagon road, small against the endless land, her shadow thin and unsure on the hard ground. She was alone, abandoned by the only people who were supposed to stay. The wind carried away the last sound of wheels and hooves, and with it went her childhood. Her name was Alara Boone, a name her mother once said with warmth and pride, back when promises still meant something. Alara was not old enough to understand why her parents left her. She only knew the sharp truth of it. A broken wheel, a shouted argument, and then silence. They had told her to wait. She waited until the sun climbed high and her throat burned dry. No one came back. In that moment, the old American frontier showed its true face. It was not kind. It was not fair. It simply was. Alara learned fast. She learned how to walk with purpose, so fear would not slow her. She learned how to listen to the land, to the cry of hawks and the warning in sudden quiet. Survival was no longer a word from sermons or campfire tales. It was her daily prayer. The West demanded strength, and Alara answered in the only way she could, with grit, with stubborn hope, and with a heart that refused to harden. Years later, the same desert watched her again. Older now, stronger, driving a wagon across a lonely stretch of land near the borderlands. The road was little more than a scar through sand and stone, traveled by traders, outlaws, and those with nothing left to lose. Stories drifted through towns like smoke. Stories of the Apache raids, stories of a warrior so fierce that even hardened men lowered their voices when his name was spoken. Stories that came from Mexico, stained with fear and blood. Alara had heard them all, and like most folks, she told herself they were meant for someone else. The wagon creaked under the weight of supplies. Alara held the reins steady, her eyes forward, her mind sharp. She lived alone now, choosing distance over danger, silence over sorrow. The past still lived in her, but it no longer ruled her, or so she believed. Fate, however, had a way of reopening wounds when you least expected it. That was when she saw him. At first she thought it was a trick of the heat. A dark shape near the rocks, barely moving. She slowed the wagon, heart pounding, every warning she had ever learned rising in her chest. Bandits sometimes played dead. Desperate men sometimes begged before they struck. The desert was full of traps, yet something held her there, something deeper than caution. He was a man carved from hardship. Broad shoulders, skin marked by old scars, his long dark hair tangled with dust and sweat. His chest rose and fell slow and uneven, as if each breath was a battle. He carried the presence of violence even in stillness, like a storm waiting beneath calm skies. An Apache warrior, unmistakable, even to someone who only knew the tribes through whispers and fear. Alara's hands shook. She knew what people said about the Apache, especially the ones who crossed borders and left ruin behind them. She knew the warnings, the tales of brutality that traveled faster than truth. She also knew that if she rode on, she might never have to face the choice again. The wagon could roll forward. The road could stay clean of his shadow. But Alara Boone had been abandoned once. She had learned how it felt to be left for the land to decide your fate. That memory burned hotter than fear. She stopped the wagon. The man did not stir as she approached. His eyes were closed, his face hard even in weakness. A broken knife lay near his hand, its blade dull with use. He smelled of dust and iron and long miles without rest. Alara crouched beside him, every sense alive. She saw the wound at his side, badly treated, the blood dark and dry. Whoever he was, warrior or monster, he was dying. Her mind screamed at her to leave. Her heart refused. Alara worked quickly, tearing cloth, cleaning the wound as best she could. The man groaned, a low sound that made her freeze, but he did not wake. His strength, even broken, felt dangerous. She wondered who he was, what stories followed him, what hands he had broken, or lives he had taken. She did not know that his name was Taza Rojo, a name spoken with terror across northern Mexico, a leader known for ruthless raids and iron command. To her, he was just a wounded soul on the edge of death. She lifted him with effort she did not know she had, dragging him into the wagon, laying him among the supplies. Each movement felt like crossing a line that could never be erased. The desert watched, silent and judging. As the wagon rolled on, Alara's thoughts tangled with doubt. Saving him could cost her everything. If he woke and turned on her, there would be no one to hear her scream. If others found them, she could be accused of harboring a killer. The old American West did not offer mercy to women who crossed its invisible rules. The man stirred as the sun dipped low, his eyes opening just enough to reveal a sharp, dark gaze filled with pain and fire. For a heartbeat, they looked at each other. Lara felt something pass between them, something raw and unspoken. Recognition, maybe, or warning. He tried to speak, his voice rough and broken, but the words did not come. Lara met his stare without flinching, though her pulse raced. She did not know that this man had led warriors through fire and gunsmoke, that his orders had shaped fear itself. She only knew that his life now rested in her hands. Night crept in, cold and unforgiving. Coyotes cried in the distance. The fire Alara built was small, cautious, barely aglow against the dark. She sat close to the wagon, rifle nearby, watching the man breathe. Each rise of his chest felt like borrowed time. The land around them carried old spirits and older grudges. Blood had soaked into this soil long before Alara was born. The West remembered everything, even when people tried to forget. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men searched for Taza Rojo, some to follow, others to kill. None of them knew that his fate had turned on the choice of an abandoned girl with dust on her. Boots and kindness still alive in her heart. As Alara stared into the fire, she felt the weight of the road ahead. Saving him was only the beginning. When he awoke fully, the truth would rise between them like a blade. Who he was, what he had done, what he might still do. The desert wind shifted, carrying secrets and danger on its breath. Alara did not know it yet, but the man she had saved would change her life, just as she had already changed his. And when the past finally caught up to them, neither would be able to run. The fire burned low as the night deepened, and Alara Boone did not sleep. She sat with her back against a wagon wheel, listening to the steady rhythm of the wounded man's breath. Each sound felt important, like a fragile promise that could break at any moment. The desert pressed close, cold and watchful, as if it knew what she had done and was waiting to see if she would regret it. She thought of the years after her parents vanished down that road, of hunger that made her dizzy, of nights spent hiding from strangers whose eyes lingered too long. The frontier had shaped her into someone careful, someone who trusted silence more than words. Yet here she was, sharing her fire with a man forged from danger. It felt like fate mocking her caution. The man shifted again, his jaw tightening as pain dragged him half awake. His hand twitched toward the broken knife before falling back to the wagon floor. Alara noticed the scars then, clearer now in the firelight, not the shallow marks of brawls, but deep lines that spoke of battles fought and survived. This was not a man who had lived quietly. This was a man who had walked through violence and carried it with him. She wondered how a warrior like him ended up alone and bleeding in the dust. Men like this usually traveled with others. Warriors did not fall without a story behind it. That story hovered between them, unspoken and heavy. At dawn, the sky bled soft colors across the horizon. Lara moved quietly, packing away what little food she had left. She checked the man's wound again. It was angry and swollen, but no worse than before. That was a small mercy. She poured water between his lips, careful not to wake him too much. When his eyes opened this time, they stayed open. He looked at her like a man measuring distance to a cliff. Alara did not speak. She had learned that words often made things worse. The man's gaze traveled to the rifle resting near her knee, then back to her face. Something unreadable flickered there, not fear, not gratitude, awareness. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, shaped by a language not her own. He said one word, a question maybe, or a name. Alara did not understand, but she understood the meaning behind it. Who are you? Why are you here? My name is Alara Boone, she said evenly. Oh, found you on the road. You were hurt. He studied her, the way hunters studied prey and allies alike. After a moment, he gave a slow nod, as if accepting a temporary truth. He did not give his name. Men like him never did, not to strangers. They traveled that morning in tense silence. Alara kept the reins steady, eyes forward, while the man lay still behind her. She could feel him watching her, even when she did not turn around. The road bent toward a dry canyon where red stone walls rose like broken teeth. It was not a place she liked, but it was the fastest way to reach a trading post where she could get supplies. By midday, the heat returned, pressing down hard. The man's breathing grew heavier, and Alara knew she could not push him much farther. She pulled the wagon into the shade of the canyon wall and set about making camp again. Each movement felt slow, careful, as if the air itself might shatter. While she worked, memories surfaced, uninvited. The night her father told her stories about the land before fences, about warriors who fought not for gold or flags but for survival and honor. Back then, those stories felt distant, almost noble. Now they sat close, breathing beside her. The man spoke again, stronger this time. He pointed to the wound, then to the horizon. Alara understood enough to answer. "I can get you help," she said, "but we can't rush it." His jaw tightened. Frustration burned in his eyes, sharp and bright. Whatever waited for him out there, it mattered more than pain. That worried her more than his silence. As the afternoon wore on, riders appeared on a distant ridge. Alara saw them first, dark shapes against the sky. Her heart jumped into her throat. She reached for the rifle without thinking. The man followed her gaze, and something changed in him. His body tensed despite the wound, every muscle coiled with purpose. The riders moved slow, scanning the land. They were not traders. Alara could tell by the way they spread out, by the weapons slung across their backs. Men like these followed trails of blood and rumor. Men like these brought judgment with them. She pulled the wagon farther into the shadow of the canyon, urging the man to stay still. He watched her with a look that held both warning and command. For a moment, she felt like a child again, facing adults who decided her fate without asking. She pushed that feeling down. The riders passed after a long stretch of time, their voices faint but sharp in the dry air. Alara did not breathe until they were gone. When she looked back, the man's eyes were closed, but his hand was clenched tight, knuckles white. Night fell again, heavier than before. The canyon trapped the cold, and the fire struggled to stay alive. Alara fed it sparingly, knowing too much light could draw attention. She sat close to the man now, not out of comfort, but necessity. If he worsened, she needed to know. He finally spoke her name, his accent rough but careful. Hearing it from his lips sent a strange chill through her. He told her a fragment of his story then, not enough to explain, just enough to warn. He spoke of betrayal, of blood owed and blood taken, of men who would not stop hunting him until the land itself swallowed them. Alara listened without interruption. She did not ask questions. Some truths came sharp enough without digging deeper. When he finished, silence settled between them again. Alara stared into the fire, her thoughts racing. She had not saved a simple traveler. She had stepped into a conflict older and darker than she understood. The key words she had heard all her life, Apache warrior, border violence, frontier justice, were no longer stories told from a safe distance. They were here, breathing, bleeding, waiting. Far away, a drum echoed once, carried on the wind, then faded. The man's head lifted slightly, his eyes narrowing toward the sound. Recognition passed over his face like a shadow. Alara felt it then, the shift she could not undo. Whatever came next would not be small. The road behind her was already gone, and the road ahead promised nothing but danger. She tightened her grip on the rifle and watched the darkness beyond the fire, knowing that someone out there was searching, and that the man she had saved was the reason why. The night stretched long and restless. Alara Boone slept in short, broken moments, waking at every sound the canyon carried. Wind scraped along stone, small rocks shifted. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and fell silent. Each noise felt like a question with no answer. She kept the fire low and her rifle close, the shape of the wounded man never far from her sight. By morning, the Apache warrior was stronger. Not healed, but awake in a way that carried weight. He sat upright against the wagon wall, jaw set, eyes sharp despite the pain that still held him. Alara handed him water, and this time he took it without hesitation. "My name is Tazarojo," he said at last, his voice steady even as his body betrayed him. The name landed hard. Alara had heard it before, whispered in trading posts and warned about on lonely roads, as a brutal Apache leader, a man tied to border violence and bloodshed. She kept her face calm, but inside, the ground shifted. Knowing his name changed everything. Names carried power out here. "You could have left me," Taza said, watching her closely. "I know," Alara replied. "Why did you not?" She thought of the wagon road from years ago, of her small feet planted in dust while her parents disappeared. "Because someone once left me," she said, "and I survived." "Not everyone does." Taza studied her for a long moment. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or calculation. With men like him, the line between the two was thin. As they traveled on, the land grew harsher. The canyon gave way to open plains, then to broken hills, where sightlines were long and unforgiving. Alara felt exposed. She could sense pursuit even when no riders were visible. The frontier had a way of tightening around you once you stepped into its deeper stories. They reached a small settlement by late afternoon, little more than a cluster of buildings clinging to survival, a trading post, a stable, a saloon that leaned like it might fall with the next strong wind. Alara slowed the wagon, but did not stop. "We cannot stay," Taza said quietly. "They will look here." "Everyone looks everywhere," Alara answered. But I need supplies." She pulled the wagon behind the stable, keeping Taza hidden under canvas. As she stepped into the trading post, eyes followed her. The West noticed strangers, especially women traveling alone. She kept her shoulders straight and her movements calm. Inside, a man with a heavy beard and cold eyes leaned against the counter. His name was Gideon Blackwell, a figure known along this stretch of land, traded in information as much as goods. Alara felt his gaze linger. "Rough road today," Gideon said. "They all are," Alara replied. He smiled thinly. "You see anyone injured out there? Anyone worth noticing?" Alara met his stare. "Just dust and heat." Gideon's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing more. She gathered bandages, food, and medicine, aware of every second ticking past. When she left, she felt his gaze on her back, heavy with suspicion. As she returned to the wagon, a different perspective unfolded not far away. On a ridge overlooking the settlement, Captain Lucian Ward watched through a scope. He wore the uniform of authority, though the frontier bent rules easily. Ward had been hunting Tazarojo for months, driven by orders and personal pride. The Apache leader had outmaneuvered him too many times. "There," Ward muttered, spotting Alara's wagon. "Pass through." His men waited for command, restless and eager. Ward raised a hand, stopping them. He was patient. Patience won wars. Back at the wagon, Taza sensed the shift before Alara spoke. His posture tightened, every instinct alive. "They are close," he said. "I know," Alara replied. "We leave now." They rolled out of the settlement as the sun dipped low, the sky bruised with color. Alara chose a less traveled path, one she had used before to avoid trouble. Taza watched the land, guiding her with quiet gestures when the road split or narrowed. Despite his injury, his awareness was sharp. He knew this terrain in a way maps never could. That night, they camped near a dry riverbed. Lara noticed how Taza reacted to the land, touching the soil, listening to the wind. This was not just survival for him, it was belonging. A contrast to her own life, always moving, never rooted. "You fight for your people," Alara said softly. "So they are not erased," Taza answered. "Men like Ward do not see us as people. Only obstacles." Alara thought of Gideon Blackwell's eyes, of how easily rumors became reasons for cruelty. "And what happens to people like me?" she asked, caught in between. Taza looked at her then, really looked. "You choose," he said. "Even now you choose." The next day brought trouble in a different form. As they crossed a narrow pass, a small group blocked the way. Not soldiers, not Apache. Bandits drawn by desperation and opportunity. Their leader, a sharp-eyed man called Calder Vance, stepped forward. "That wagon looks heavy," Calder said. "Be a shame if something happened." Alara slowed, heart racing. Taza shifted behind her, pain etched across his face, but fire still burning. "There's nothing worth dying for," Alara said carefully. Calder laughed. "Out here, everything is worth dying for." Before the situation could break, gunfire echoed from the ridge. Not aimed to kill, but to scatter. Calder's men panicked, retreating into the rocks. Lara looked up to see Captain Ward's men moving into position. Ward had found them. Taza cursed under his breath, gripping the wagon rail. "He will not stop," he said. Ilara's hands shook as she turned the wagon hard, pushing the horses beyond comfort. Shots cracked through the air, dust kicking up around them. Fear burned hot, but she did not slow. They escaped by inches, diving into a wooded ravine where the horses could hide. When silence finally returned, Ilara collapsed against the wagon, breath ragged. "This is my fault," she said. Taza shook his head. "No, this is the cost of crossing lines." As night fell again, deeper and darker than before, Ilara understood the truth she had been avoiding. Saving Taza Rojo had pulled her into a war of identities, borders, and survival. Gideon Blackwell's suspicions. Captain Ward's hunt. Calder Vance's greed. Every path led back to the man she had rescued. And yet, as she looked at Taza, wounded but unbroken, she knew she would not turn back. The desert had tested her before and found her standing. Now, it demanded more. Somewhere beyond the trees, Captain Ward studied tracks and smiled. Somewhere in the settlement, Gideon Blackwell spoke her name to the wrong ears. And somewhere deep in the land, Apache drums echoed again, calling warriors home. Ilara Boone sat awake, knowing the storm was no longer coming. It had already begun. The ravine held them like a secret, its trees bending close as if to hide what moved beneath their branches. Ilara Boone kept the horses quiet, stroking their necks until their breathing slowed. Her own pulse took longer. The sound of gunfire still echoed in her ears, not loud now, but sharp enough to remind her how close everything had come apart. Taza Rojo leaned against the wagon, his face pale, but his eyes steady. Pain pulled at him, yet his focus never drifted. He listened to the land the way Ilara listened to her own thoughts, careful and alert. After a while, he spoke. "Ward will circle. He will not rush again." Ilara nodded. She had seen that look in the captain's eyes from a distance. The kind that waited, patient and sure. "Then we move before he does." They traveled under cover of dusk, following paths Taza remembered from years before. Old Apache routes that twisted through stone and scrub, unseen by those who only trusted roads drawn on paper. Ilara felt the land change as they moved deeper, as if crossing into a space that belonged to someone else. The frontier here was older, quieter, and filled with memory. Along the way, Taza shared more. Not excuses or boasts, but truth shaped by survival. He spoke of broken treaties, of families driven south by force, of leaders who chose strength because weakness invited erasure. Ilara listened, understanding more than she expected. The keywords she had heard all her life took on faces now, voices, grief. They reached a high plateau by morning, the land opening wide beneath a pale sky. In the distance, smoke rose thin and steady. Taza stiffened. "My people," he said. "They are close." Relief washed through Ilara, followed quickly by fear. His people were near, so were his enemies. Gideon Blackwell's whispers would travel fast. Captain Ward would not be far behind. As if summoned by thought, trouble found them again. Rider approached from the south, alone but bold. It was Gideon Blackwell, his horse lathered, his eyes bright with intent. "Well now?" Gideon called, slowing at a safe distance. "Looks like the desert brings folks together in unexpected ways." Ilara stepped forward, rifle lowered, but ready. "You followed us?" Gideon smiled. "I follow opportunity. And you, Miss Boone, are standing in the middle of one." His gaze slid to Taza, recognition flaring. So the stories were true. Taza did not move. "Leave," he said simply. Gideon laughed, but there was tension in it. "Captain Ward will pay well for you, dead or alive." Ilara felt the choice press down hard. Running would only delay the inevitable. She took a breath. "You sell people," she said. "You sell fear." Gideon's smile faded. "This is the West. Everyone sells something." Before he could say more, a horn sounded from the ridge. Ward's signal. Gideon cursed under his breath and wheeled his horse away. "Looks like time's up," he said. "Choose carefully." Ward's men appeared like ghosts, spreading across the high ground. Ilara's heart hammered. Taza reached for her arm, steadying her. "There is one way left," he said. "But it is dangerous." "When has it not been?" she replied. They fled toward the smoke, toward the Apache camp. The land rose and fell, testing their strength. Shots rang out behind them. Closer now. Ward rode hard, his voice carrying orders sharp and clear. He was a man who believed the frontier belonged to those strong enough to claim it. They broke through the last line of scrub as Apache warriors emerged, weapons ready, eyes fierce, the air filled with shouts in a language older than the borders chasing. "Them," Taza called out, his voice strong despite the wound. Recognition rippled through the camp. The confrontation froze for a heartbeat. Ward reined in his horse, staring across the space at Taza, at the warriors forming behind him, at Alara standing between worlds. The tension was thick enough to taste. "This ends now," Ward called. "Step aside, woman. This is not your fight." Alara did not move. She felt the weight of every step that had brought her here, from the wagon road of her childhood to this moment. "It is my fight," she said. "You made it so." Ward's jaw tightened. He raised his hand, signaling his men to hold. He was calculating, measuring loss and gain. Gideon Blackwell lingered at the edge, watching, waiting for advantage. Taza spoke then, his voice carrying across the open ground. He offered terms, not surrender, but truth. A chance to end bloodshed without more graves. Ward listened, his expression unreadable. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. Sweat traced down Alara's spine as she stood still, refusing to retreat. The land itself seemed to wait, holding breath. A child's cry sounded from the camp, sudden and sharp. Alara saw Ward flinch just slightly. For the first time, doubt crept into his eyes. Gideon shifted, sensing the change, and made his move. He raised his rifle, aiming not at Taza, but at Alara. "Enough talk," he said. "This ends with a reward." Taza moved faster than Alara thought possible, pain forgotten. Warriors surged forward. Ward shouted orders. The world exploded into motion. Alara dropped to the ground as chaos erupted, dust and sound swallowing everything. She crawled toward the wagon, heart pounding, knowing that whatever happened next would decide everything. The desert roared, alive with history and consequence. Above it all, Apache drums began to beat, steady and strong, echoing across the plateau. Alara felt the rhythm in her chest, a promise and a warning all at once. She did not know how it would end. She only knew she would not turn away. The storm they had stepped into now surrounded them, and somewhere within it, the path toward a different future waited to be claimed. The dust settled slowly, as if the land itself was deciding what would remain standing. Alara Boone pushed herself up from the ground, ears ringing, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. The sounds of chaos faded into scattered movement and raised voices, no longer sharp with attack, but tense with aftermath. She lifted her head and searched through the haze for the one face she needed to see. Taza Rojo stood near the center of the plateau, supported by two Apache warriors. His wound had opened again, darkening his side, yet he remained upright. Blood marked his skin, but his posture was unbroken. He was alive.
Ow.
Relief washed through Alara so strongly her knees weakened. Captain Lucien Ward stood several paces away, his weapon lowered, but not gone. His men had pulled back, uncertain now, caught between orders and reality. Around them, Apache warriors formed a steady line, not advancing, not retreating. They waited, calm and ready, their presence a quiet truth that could no longer be ignored. Gideon Blackwell lay on the ground, disarmed and furious, held fast by two warriors who did not bother to meet his eyes. His gamble had failed. The opportunist who thrived in shadows now found himself exposed beneath an unforgiving sky. Ward took a breath and removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked older suddenly, the weight of choices pressing down. "This land has seen enough," he said, his voice carrying without force. "Enough chasing, enough bodies." Taza met his gaze. "Then stop hunting ghosts," he said. "We are not shadows. We're still here." Silence followed, heavy but no longer hostile. Lara stepped forward before doubt could stop her. She stood between them, a woman who had been abandoned and survived, now refusing to be invisible again. "This ends today," she said, "not with victory, with truth." Ward studied her, really studied her, and something shifted. Perhaps he saw not defiance but resolve. He nodded once. "Take him," he said, gesturing toward Gideon. "He answers for what he has done." Gideon shouted protests, but no one listened. His power faded the moment others refused to fear him. The Apache warriors led him away, his voice swallowed by the open land. Ward turned to Taza. "I cannot erase what came before," he said, "but I can stop what comes next." Taza considered this, then nodded slowly. "Then leave," he said, "and do not return with weapons." Ward mounted his horse and signaled his men. They rode away without ceremony, the sound of hooves fading into distance. For the first time in days, the plateau felt still. Ilara moved to Taz's side as the warriors eased him down. Her hands shook as she pressed fresh bandages to his wound. "You scared me," she said quietly. Taza smiled faintly. "You stood when many would have run." The days that followed passed with careful healing. Ilara remained with the Apache camp, welcomed not as a captive or outsider, but as a guest. She helped where she could, learning names, learning stories. The children watched her with curiosity, then laughter. The women shared food and quiet smiles. The land no longer felt hostile, felt honest. Taza healed slowly, stubborn as stone. Each day he grew stronger, his presence steady and grounding. He and Ilara spoke often, not of war, but of roads traveled and roads lost. She told him of the wagon road, of waiting until hope ran dry. He listened without interruption, his eyes dark with understanding. "You were never weak," he told her. "You were tested." When Taza was strong enough to walk alone, they stood together at the edge of the plateau, looking out over land shaped by struggle and endurance. The border no longer felt like a wound, but a scar that had learned to hold. Ilara faced a choice then. She could return to her quiet life of movement and distance, or she could stay and help build something steadier. The frontier offered few chances at belonging. This felt like one of them. "I want to stay," she said, "at least for a while." Taza nodded. "You have a place here?" Word of the standoff traveled fast. The story changed, as stories do, but the truth remained. A woman abandoned by her parents had chosen compassion over fear. A feared Apache warrior had chosen restraint over rage. The old American frontier, harsh and unforgiving, had witnessed something rare, a moment where survival did not demand cruelty. Seasons shifted. The land softened, then hardened again. Ilara found purpose in helping trade between camps and settlements, using her knowledge of both worlds. Suspicion did not vanish overnight, but it eased. Trust grew, slow and real. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Taza joined Ilara by the fire. The drums played softly behind them, not for war, but for gathering. He handed her a small carving, smooth and worn. "For the road you walked," he said, "and the one you chose." Ilara held it close, feeling the weight of it settle into her palm. She looked at the fire, then at him. "Never thought a single choice could change so much." Taza smiled. The land remembers brave choices. The desert wind moved gently through the camp, carrying laughter, carrying life. Ilara Boone sat grounded and unafraid, no longer running from abandonment, no longer defined by loss. She had saved a man without knowing who he was, and in doing so had found herself. The frontier stretched on, still wild, still demanding, but now it held a story not just of survival, but of understanding. And that story, carried on wind and memory, was enough to make the future feel possible.